This part is going up on Christmas Day, so Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to everyone. Also, before I get into this part, I wanted to go more into what I think the Universe 7 Kale would be like. I did go into that she still had her shy and timid nature, to the point that she didn't want to fight. In the anime, we've seen some differences between both Broly and Kale, such as Broly having fits of anger and having access to different forms, such as the Wrathful and the regular Super Saiyan form, while Kale went straight to the legendary Super Saiyan form and then had controlled versions of it. So, for this timeline, I'm going to make Kale a combination of the two, where she could still control the legendary Super Saiyan form eventually, but she'd also have access to the Wrathful and regular Super Saiyan forms. She would also have some fits of anger at first like Broly did, but not nearly as often as he did. Anyway, now we can get into this part, since that was everything that I forgot to go over in the last part. After Sala was revived, she'd likely have Kale fill her in on how life here on Namek works, but since she's still just a child, she would have trouble explaining it. So when Kale takes her to Mori's village, so that's where she's been staying, she would have Mori help explain everything to Sala. With the Namekian's peaceful nature and lifestyle, this would be a good fit for Sala's desired way of life as well, since she wasn't battle hungry like most Saiyans. But she sees it as a good place to settle down. She would talk to Mori about getting a house built for her and her daughter. After their house is built and Kale settles into it, she'd learn more about the Namekian way of life as time goes on. As mentioned last time, they would try to teach her some fighting techniques, but she didn't show any interest in it at all. She basically had an aversion to fighting, and even though they tried to teach her the lesson about it being okay to fight when it's for the right cause, such as protecting someone, this lesson doesn't stick with her. Instead, she took interest in the other sides of the Namekian culture, such as being a farmer. Even though farming there could get repetitive, since we've only seen about one type of plant that is grown there, she still finds it relaxing and enjoyable. Over time, she'd grow even more of a peaceful nature, which would just strengthen her aversion to fighting even more. While Sala could see the Namekian's point about it not being wrong to fight in some circumstances, she wouldn't try to change her daughter's mind, as she wouldn't like to force anything on her like that. Also, something to point out is that Kale wouldn't just be learning the Namekian way of life. Since her mother is on the planet with her, she learned about some aspects of Saiyan culture as well. Of course, she wouldn't really be interested in their fighting, but she would be interested in the other aspects of Saiyan life. For example, the parts about space travel would be interesting to the young child. While we never really see this part of Planet Vegeta, it's highly likely they had farmers of their own, which, unlike Namek, these farmers likely raised animals as well, instead of just growing plants. Kale would find that interesting. It would be something that she'd like to try, though unfortunately for her, there aren't many animals we know about on Namek that could be useful to raise. The only animals we really know about on Namek are the frogs and the fish, which I don't see a benefit from raising them. She wouldn't raise animals for the purpose of butchering them. She was raise animals that would be more of like raising a cow to get milk, a chicken to get eggs, or a sheep to get wool, though as far as we know, we haven't seen any animals like that on Namek. So, unfortunately, she wouldn't get to try raising animals on Namek, but doesn't mean she wouldn't interact with them. Since she still had an interest in animals, she'd likely try to catch some of the frogs or fish and keep them as pets. She could even take to studying the animals with the help of the Namekians. She might also study the different plants of Namek too, along with potentially keeping a sketchbook to write and draw her findings in. Essentially, she might get more interest in the science of biology, though she'd be more interested in the zoology and botany aspects of biology. So, because of this, we could get a more intelligent Kale, so she would spend her free time continuing to learn more about the life on Namek. So, she'd likely eventually get help building some kind of fish tank in her house, so when she caught fish, she could put them in there to study them. Though, after she finishes studying them, she would likely release them back into the rivers, ponds, lakes, or oceans, depending on where she got them. There'll likely be very few she keeps as a pet, mainly just ones she finds extremely interesting. She might also have some kind of enclosure built so she could do studies of land animals as well, instead of just fish. Assuming there are birds on Namek as well, she might request an aviary to be built so she could study them. But these enclosures could vary widely depending on the type of animals. Since they have frogs on Namek, they likely have insects that the frogs eat too. Which, if there are insects on Namek, she could have terrariums made for studying things like insects, amphibians, and reptiles. Larger enclosures could be needed as well, since there's likely larger animals that eat the frogs and so on. Regardless, she'd release the animals into the wild as well once she finished her studies on them. If she was also interested in the botany, she could also ask for a greenhouse-like building too, so that she could study plants as well. After she finishes studying a plant, she would likely go and replant it where she found it, though she might start a personal garden of her own with plants she found interesting. Which, that's probably the most she would get involved in the Namekian culture, so she wouldn't get into training and fighting techniques. Something else to mention that since she's from Universe 7, she would have a tail. Though, since Namek has 3 suns and doesn't have a moon, they would never see Kale turn into a great ape. They might learn that she can from Sala, but Mori wouldn't have her tail removed, since he would have no reason to worry about that happening. However, when they realized her tail's weakness of hers when grabbed, they would work on helping her overcome that weakness, which took Goku 3 years to get over that weakness, and since Kale would be on Namek far longer than 3 years, Mori would be able to help her overcome this weakness. Anyway, even if Mori doesn't have to worry about her going into her grade 8 form, he might need to worry about Kale's brief fits of anger, but she is more like Broly in this timeline. Her power continues to rise when she gets into these fits of rage, especially when they do get to the little bits of training that they wanted her to do. This would cause her power to raise as well. So, as time goes on, it would become harder to get her back under control in these moments of anger. Unlike Paragus and Broly, they wouldn't make a device to control her, since they see that type of thing as cruel. Instead, it would work on teaching her to meditate to calm down when she starts to get angry, which she'd be more than happy to do this, as she doesn't like the feeling of losing control when she goes into a fit of rage. Her not liking that feeling of losing control would just strengthen her resolve to not fight. It would only strengthen this resolve since she'd worry if she got in a fight, she could fully lose control of herself. While this meditation would help her, as it would lessen the number of outbursts she has, and in times it didn't help calm her, it still becomes more difficult to control her. So, Mori might eventually suggest to her that they go see the other village elders. He would only suggest this since he thinks that it's possible that they might know some ways to help her. Since she wanted to get this under control as well, she would take Mori's advice and go meet with the village elders. While they might know some different meditation techniques than what Mori did, they don't completely work. Since she does have some different techniques at her disposal now, it does lessen the amount of her outbursts even more, but they don't go away completely. She would thank them for their help though, as she'd then return to Mori's village. Once she returned, she would tell him how the training with them went. He would be glad to hear that her outbursts have lessened, though he has one more suggestion that she can try, so she still has some outbursts. Mori would suggest that she go and see the Grand Elder next, since Guru is very knowledgeable and could likely help her. This would also be somewhat beneficial since the regular warrior Namekians were having trouble stopping her when she has these outbursts, but Nail shouldn't have trouble with this. So, she again takes Mori's advice and goes off to see Guru and Nail. Once she is allowed to see Guru, she would fill him in on the predicament they were facing with her outbursts of anger. She would tell him they tried everything that Mori and the other village elders thought of. Guru would likely have knowledge of meditation techniques that the village elders didn't, and some of them would likely be even more helpful to her than the village elders' techniques were. He might try to suggest her to train with Nail, since fighting a little might be able to help her blow off some steam every now and then. She wouldn't do this often though, as she doesn't enjoy fighting, but she at least tries it a couple times, so she wants to get better control of herself. Over time, the techniques Guru taught her in the brief sessions of blowing off steam would work. The time she has these outbursts would essentially become slim to none. Then as for the time she still does have these outbursts, Nail would easily be able to get her under control. However, her power would continue to grow over time, though it would be growing slowly. Also, while she was staying with Guru and Nail, she would continue her studies of plants and animals, which, since Guru might have knowledge about different plants, animals, insects, and fish the village elders didn't know about, he could help her with these studies as well. So, there's times she'd travel around the planet in search of these plants, animals, insects, and fish Guru mentioned. After finding them, she'd take them to her home in Mori's village and study them there, before releasing them back to the wild or replanting them. So she would have to balance these studies with her learning from Guru and training from Nail. She wouldn't get to do these expeditions for plants and animals too often. While she is learning from Guru, he would likely be able to teach her more about the culture of the Namekians as well. Mainly, he could teach her about Namekian history since he lived through major parts of it, though he'd also have access to the books that detail their history before his time, and he'd allow her to read those books as well. So, by the time she returns to Mori's village, she would have a far better level of control over herself than she did when she left. Since she was able to continue her interest in studying animals and plants too, she returned more knowledgeable than when she left as well. Since her outbursts were few and far between now, the Namekians didn't have to worry about her that much anymore. If it did happen, the warrior Namekians in Mori's village were at least able to hold her off until Nail arrived. Also, every now and again, at the Grand Elder's request, she'd go back and visit him and Nail. During these visits, she'd meditate with Guru, and he would tell her more about Namekian history along with different plants and animals she could study. Also on these visits, she would have some of her training sessions with Nail, but she still doesn't go farther than learning some of their basic fighting and ki techniques. Guru might even offer to unlock her potential at some point, but she'd turn it down. She tries to avoid fighting, so why would she want her latent power unlocked? Anyway, since Guru and Nail were helping her like this, she'd always thank them before leaving to return to her home in Mori's village. At their home, even though Sala wasn't much into fighting either, there might be some brief times she spars with Kale to help her blow off some steam too. The warrior Namekians of the village will likely help Kale with this as well, so this could help both Sala and the warrior Namekians grow in power too. As per usual, since she has no desire to fight, these sparring sessions wouldn't be at her request. They'll be when the warrior Namekians or her mother suggests it, which it is rare for Sala to suggest one of these sessions to her daughter, as she doesn't enjoy fighting either, so they don't spar often at all. Over time, with the meditating Kale has done, she becomes calmer and more peaceful as well. But she finds these times of meditating relaxing, like what we've seen Piccolo do. There's times she'll go off alone to meditate, and these times she goes off alone, she'll likely go into a place that is full of nature, as she finds it the most relaxing when she's surrounded by the wildlife of Namek. She'll still learn more about the Saiyan culture as well from Sala, and she might even be taught the Saiyan language. Though, Sala likely wouldn't speak a lot about her father, so she was still angry with him after what he was trying to do on planet Vegeta. Kale would likely learn she has a brother named Broly though, but she wouldn't really ask about him. The few times she asked about it, she would have picked up on how the topic saddened her mother, so she decided to stop bringing it up. So, if she ever did hear more about her father or brother, it was because her mother brought it up, not because she asked about it. During Sala's life on Namek, while she wouldn't become as invested in plants and animals like her daughter did, she might start gardening as a hobby as well. This way, she could at least have something to do to spend time with her daughter and bond with her over, and it would be a shared interest of theirs. She'll also likely learn about Namekian culture from the Namekians, and eventually learn their language as well. So, over the years of living on Namek, Kale and Sala would basically become incorporated into the Namekian culture. As Kale grows up, their life on Namek would also be an enjoyable and peaceful one. That is, until one day while Kale was at Guru's, the Grand Elder noticed something on its way to Namek. After further inspecting what was coming to Namek, he would sense a lot of key signatures, almost like an army, though he'd also notice one giant key signature within them, and he would then tell Kale and Nail what he noticed. Then he would speak telepathically to the other Namekians and warn them about the potential upcoming threat. So, the Namekians would then start getting ready for this potential threat, as the unknown spaceship arrives and lands on Namek.